The morning mist clung to the purple grass like ghostly fingers as Krell tested the air with his forked tongue. 3 cycles had passed since the small ship crashed into this forgotten world, and the scent trail was finally strong enough to follow. His massive frame moved through the alien forest without disturbing a single leaf, each step placed with the precision that had made his species the most feared hunters in 12-star systems. The Ravak warrior stood 12 feet tall when fully upright, his dark scales shifting color to match the shadows around him. 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws hung at his sides, while his elongated skull housed sensory organs that could detect heartbeats from half a mile away. Along his spine, bioluminescent ridges pulsed with a soft blue glow, marking him as a mature hunter who had claimed over 50 trophies in his lifetime. Krell paused beside a twisted tree whose bark resembled molten metal. The crashed vessel's debris trail had led him across 2 continents, but the survivors had proven more resourceful than expected. Most prey species simply waited to die after their ships failed, but these refugees had actually built something resembling a settlement. The thought made his inner jaw click with anticipation. His enhanced vision picked up heat signatures ahead, clustered around what appeared to be crude structures. Krell counted at least 15 distinct patterns, maybe more. The thermal readings suggested multiple species, which would make this hunt worthy of the great ballads. In Ravak culture, a warrior who could claim an entire mixed settlement would earn songs that lasted for generations. The wind shifted, bringing new scents. Krell's nostrils flared as he identified the different species' signatures. The sweet, plant-like aroma belonged to Teln, those pathetic herbivores who spent their lives tending gardens. Mixed with that was the sharper, metallic scent of Miran, the 4-armed scholars who thought knowledge could replace strength. There were others too, unfamiliar smells that made his hunting instincts surge with excitement. Krell crept closer, moving from shadow to shadow with fluid grace. The settlement sprawled beside a clear stream, built mostly from salvaged ship parts and native materials. Rough shelters clustered around a central fire pit, while primitive farming plots stretched toward the water's edge. Solar collectors gleamed dully in the morning light, cobbled together from what looked like life support systems. Through his scope-enhanced vision, Krell watched the inhabitants begin their daily routines. A group of Teln emerged from one shelter, their leaf-like skin patterns shifting from night blue to day green as sunlight touched them. They moved toward the farming plots with the slow, peaceful manner that made them such satisfying prey. Krell had hunted Teln before and knew they would make beautiful sounds when he finally revealed himself. Near the stream, several Miran clustered around what appeared to be a communications array. Their 4 arms moved in complex patterns as they adjusted components and checked readings. Krell's lip curled in disdain. The scholars always believed their technology could save them, right up until his claws found their throats. He had 17 Miran skulls in his trophy haul, each one taken from beings who thought. Intelligence mattered more than survival instincts, but there was something different about this settlement that made Krell pause. The defensive positions were subtle but effective. Escape routes had been cleared through the underbrush. Watch positions offered good views of approaches while remaining concealed. This level of tactical thinking was unusual for typical refugee species. Krell's enhanced hearing picked up conversations from the settlement. The Teln discussed crop rotations and soil composition. The Miran debated repair priorities and power distribution schedules. All normal prey behavior, focused on survival rather than security. Yet those defensive preparations suggested someone. Among them understood warfare. The Ravak warrior settled into a hunting crouch beside a cluster of crystalline flowers. Patience was essential for a proper hunt. He would observe for several days, learning their patterns and identifying the strongest individuals. The art of hunting required understanding prey behavior, finding the perfect moment to strike for maximum terror and minimum risk. As the day progressed, Krell mapped the settlement's layout and cataloged its inhabitants. The Teln seemed to be led by a young farmer who coordinated their agricultural efforts. The Miran followed the guidance of an older scientist who managed their technical operations. Both species showed the typical refugee mindset, focused on rebuilding rather than preparing for threats, but there was one individual who caught Krell's attention. A figure that moved differently from the others with economical gestures and constant awareness of surroundings. This being stayed in the background, working on construction projects and maintenance tasks, but Krell's predator instincts marked it as potentially dangerous. The unknown individual appeared humanoid, but lacked the distinctive features of any species in Krell's mental catalog. Medium height, bipedal, with pale skin and short brown hair. Nothing particularly impressive physically, yet something about its bearing suggested hidden capabilities. When others worked in groups, this being often positioned itself where it could observe approaches to the settlement, Krell made a mental note to eliminate this individual first. Unknown factors could disrupt even the most carefully planned hunt. His experience had taught him that prey species sometimes produced unexpected variants, individuals who possessed greater survival instincts than their fellows. Such anomalies needed to be removed quickly before they could organize effective resistance. The afternoon brought more opportunities for observation. Krell watched as the mysterious humanoid helped repair a shelter's wall, noting how it selected materials and positioned supports for maximum structural integrity. Later, he observed it checking the perimeter, moving along paths that provided good sight lines while remaining concealed from outside observation. Most telling was how the other refugees responded to this individual. They sought its advice on practical matters and deferred to its judgment on security arrangements. Yet they showed none of the formal respect typically given to official leaders. This suggested someone with natural authority who preferred to remain in the background. As evening approached, Krell retreated to a concealed position where he could rest while maintaining surveillance. Tomorrow he would begin the actual hunt, starting with isolated individuals who strayed too far from the group. The mysterious humanoid would require special attention, but Krell felt confident in his abilities. After all, he had never encountered prey that could match a Ravak warrior's combination of strength, speed, and cunning. The settlement's lights flickered on as darkness fell, casting warm glows that would make his night vision even more effective. Soon, Krell thought with satisfaction, these peaceful refugees would learn why the Ravak were feared throughout the galaxy. Their skulls would make excellent additions to his collection, and the songs of this hunt would echo through Ravak halls for generations to come. Dawn came slowly to the refugee settlement, painted in shades of amber and violet that filtered through the alien atmosphere. Dr. Voss emerged from the largest shelter, stretching all four of his arms as he surveyed the day ahead. The Miran scientist had never imagined he would spend his final years managing a collection of crash survivors, but leadership had fallen to him through simple necessity and unanimous consent from the other refugees. The settlement had grown considerably since those first desperate days after the crash. What began as a huddle of survivors around scattered debris had evolved into something resembling a functioning community. Solar panels gleamed on every roof, harvested from the ship's power systems and rewired to provide steady electricity. Water purification units hummed quietly beside the stream, ensuring clean drinking water for all 23 inhabitants. Nim stepped carefully between the growing rows of purple grain that would soon provide their main food source. The young Telm farmer had adapted remarkably well to this world soil composition, discovering that native bacteria actually enhanced the growth of several crop varieties they had brought from their homeworld. Her leaf-patterned skin showed the deep green of contentment as she checked each plant for signs of disease or pest damage. The Teln had always been agricultural specialists, but Nim possessed an almost supernatural understanding of plant behavior. She could predict weather changes by observing how certain flowers opened their petals, and she had identified 17 native plants that were not only edible but actually nutritious for the various species in their settlement. Her work had quite literally kept them all alive during those first difficult months near the communications array. 3 Miran technicians worked to boost their signal strength. The equipment had been cobbled together from navigation systems, entertainment units, and emergency beacons, creating a broadcasting system that could theoretically reach passing ships within a 2 light-year radius. Dr. Voss had calculated that their chances of rescue improved by roughly 3% each month. As more vessels learned of their location, the settlement's unofficial human resident moved quietly between the various work groups, offering assistance wherever needed. Alex Reed had never formally introduced himself with rank or military background, presenting himself simply as another refugee who happened to have practical skills. The others knew him as someone reliable who could fix almost anything and always seemed to know the most efficient way to accomplish tasks. This morning, Alex was helping to reinforce the settlement's main shelter. The structure had been built around the ship's former mess hall, using hull plating for walls and transparent aluminum viewports for windows. Alex had suggested several modifications that improved both structural integrity and defensive positions, though he had presented these ideas as common-sense improvements rather than military preparations. Dr. Voss watched Alex work and wondered, not for the first time, about the human's background. There was something in his movements, an economy of motion and constant awareness that suggested training beyond civilian experience. When Alex positioned support beams, he seemed to consider sight lines and cover points as much as structural requirements. When he suggested modifications to their perimeter, he spoke in terms of early warning rather than simple convenience. The morning's work progressed with the steady rhythm that had developed over months of cooperation. The Miran handled technical systems and long-term planning. The Tel managed food production and environmental adaptation. Several other species contributed their own specialties, from the crystalline beings who could sense mineral deposits to the gas-breathing traders who maintained their atmospheric processing equipment. Alex moved between groups, translating technical concepts between species with different approaches to problem-solving. The Miran thought in mathematical models and systematic analysis. The Teln understood things through organic relationships and natural patterns. Alex seemed able to bridge these different perspectives, finding common ground that allowed effective collaboration. As the day progressed, Dr. Voss noticed Alex making subtle checks of their defensive measures. The human walked the perimeter under the guise of collecting firewood, but his route took him past every concealed observation post they had established. He examined the early warning devices they had scattered in the surrounding forest, ostensibly checking for weather damage but actually testing their functionality. These defensive preparations had been Alex's idea, though he had introduced them gradually and always with reasonable explanations. Motion sensors to warn of dangerous wildlife. Camouflage shelters for protection during storms. Escape routes through the forest in case of flash floods. Each measure seemed logical for refugee survival, but together they formed a comprehensive security network that would be the envy of many military installations. The afternoon brought a community meeting in the central area, where they discussed resource allocation and work assignments. Dr. Voss facilitated these gatherings with the patient skill of someone accustomed to managing academic committees. Every voice was heard, every concern addressed, and decisions reached through consensus rather than authority. Nim reported on crop yields and suggested expanding their farming area toward the mineral-rich soil near the eastern hills. The Miran technicians proposed upgrading their communication array with components salvaged from the shuttle's backup navigation system. Others contributed ideas about weather protection, tool manufacturing, and long-term sustainability. Alex listened more than he spoke, but when he did offer suggestions, they were invariably practical and well-considered. He supported Nim's farming expansion but recommended establishing multiple smaller plots rather than one large field. He endorsed the communication upgrades but suggested maintaining backup systems in case their primary array was damaged. His contributions always seemed focused on redundancy and contingency planning. After the meeting, as the settlement prepared for evening meal, Alex helped with food preparation and distribution. He worked alongside everyone else, showing no signs of considering himself superior or separate from the group. Yet Dr. Voss noticed how Alex positioned himself where he could observe the approaches to their gathering area, and how his attention occasionally drifted to the forest beyond their lights. The evening meal was a cheerful affair, with stories and music from various homeworlds. The tone sang harmonies that sounded like wind through crystal chimes. The Miran shared mathematical puzzles that somehow became entertainment when solved collaboratively. Others contributed their own cultural traditions, creating a unique blend. Of refugee society, Alex contributed less obvious skills to these gatherings. He could repair almost any device, seemed to know basic medical treatment for multiple species, and possessed a vast store of practical knowledge about survival techniques. When asked about his background, he always deflected with humor or changed the subject, leaving his fellow refugees with the impression that he was simply someone who had learned useful skills through necessity. As the gathering wound down and inhabitants began retiring to their shelters, Alex made his usual circuit of the settlement's perimeter. He checked locks, tested alarms, and verified that their security measures remained functional. To casual observers, he appeared to be performing routine maintenance, but his movements followed the pattern of a trained sentry conducting a professional security sweep. Dr. Voss watched from his shelter's window as Alex completed his rounds. The human moved with quiet confidence through the darkness, checking each position with practiced efficiency. Whatever Alex's background might be, Dr. Voss felt grateful to have someone so competent helping to protect their small community. The settlement settled into peaceful quiet as its inhabitants prepared for sleep. Solar batteries hummed softly as they stored power for the night. Water purifiers continued their steady work. Communications equipment sent automated distress signals toward the distant stars. Everything seemed normal and secure in their little refuge. In the forest beyond their lights, something large and predatory watched with growing interest, studying the settlement's routines and planning the hunt that would soon begin. The attack came during the darkest hour before dawn, when the settlement's inhabitants slept deepest and their guard was lowest. Pell had volunteered for the night shift at the communications array, monitoring for any response to their distress signals while running diagnostics on their improvised equipment. The young Miran engineer worked alone, his forearms dancing across control panels as he fine-tuned their transmission frequency. Krell approached from downwind, his bioluminescent ridges dimmed to near invisibility. The Ravok warrior had spent 3 days studying the settlement's routines, mapping every patrol route and identifying the moments of greatest vulnerability. Pell's isolated position made him the perfect first target, close enough to the settlement to spread fear but far enough away to avoid immediate discovery. The Miran never sensed the predator's approach. Krell's talons closed around Pell's throat before the engineer could even turn around, cutting off any cry for help. The struggle was brief and silent, ending when massive claws found vital organs with surgical precision. Krell dragged the body into the forest, leaving only disturbed equipment and a few drops of blue blood to mark what had happened. When the morning shift arrived to relieve Pell, they found the communications station empty. The equipment hummed quietly, still transmitting their automated distress beacon, but its operator had vanished. Scorch marks on a control panel suggested some kind of electrical malfunction, while overturned furniture indicated a struggle of some kind. Dr. Voss arrived within minutes of the discovery, his normally calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. The Miran scientist examined the scene with methodical precision, noting every detail that might explain Pell's disappearance. The young engineer was responsible and reliable, not someone who would abandon his post without explanation. Alex appeared shortly after Dr. Voss, drawn by the commotion and unusual activity around the communications array. While the others discussed possible explanations, Alex quietly studied the physical evidence. His trained eye picked up details that the civilians missed, signs that painted a disturbing picture of what had actually occurred. The scuff marks in the dirt showed a specific pattern that Alex recognized from his military training. The way furniture had been overturned suggested a struggle involving something much larger than any species in their settlement. Most telling were the gouges in the metal console, 4 parallel scratches that could only have been made by claws longer than any natural predator on this world should possess. Alex kept his observations to himself, not wanting to cause panic among people who had already endured too much trauma. Instead, he suggested practical measures like expanding their buddy system and improving lighting around key installations. He framed these recommendations as responses to equipment failure rather than predator attack, maintaining the illusion that Pell had simply wandered off due to some kind of accident. The search parties that formed during the day found no trace of the missing engineer. Teams of volunteers combed the surrounding forest, calling Pell's name and searching for any sign of where he might have gone. They discovered nothing except broken branches and disturbed undergrowth that led deeper into the wilderness before disappearing entirely. Krell watched the search efforts from concealment, satisfied with the level of fear his first strike had generated. The refugees moved in larger groups now, constantly looking over their shoulders and jumping at unexpected sounds. Their comfortable routines had been disrupted, replaced by nervous vigilance that would make them easier to manipulate during subsequent attacks. 2 days later, Krell struck again. This time his target was Lyra, one of the crystalline beings who worked alone processing mineral samples near the stream. The predator waited until she had moved far enough from the settlement to muffle any sounds, then attacked with the same swift brutality that had claimed Pell. Lyra's disappearance followed the same pattern as Pell's. Equipment left running, signs of struggle, no body to be found. Dr. Voss called another community meeting to discuss security measures, but his suggestions remained focused on preventing accidents rather than defending against deliberate attacks. The concept of a predator hunting them seemed too horrible to acknowledge directly. Alex attended the meeting but said little, his attention focused on studying his fellow refugees' reactions. Most showed the expected signs of fear and confusion, clustering together for mutual support and avoiding isolated areas. But Alex also noticed more subtle behaviors that suggested at least some of them suspected they were being hunted. Nim had stopped working alone in the distant fields, instead organizing group harvesting expeditions that kept everyone within sight of each other. Several of the Moran technicians had begun carrying improvised weapons, tools that could serve double duty if violence became necessary. The changes were small but significant, indicating that survival instincts were beginning to override the refugees' preference for peaceful cooperation. That night, Alex quietly reinforced the settlement's perimeter defenses. He repositioned motion sensors to cover blind spots, added makeshift alarms to previously unmonitored areas, and established backup communication links between different sections of the settlement. He worked carefully to avoid alerting whatever was hunting them, while still improving their chances of detecting future attacks. The third disappearance came 4 days later, when Beth, one of the human refugees who had been helping with food preparation, failed to return from gathering edible roots in the forest. Her empty basket was found beside a stream, surrounded by footprints that told a story of terror and violence. This time, the search parties found actual evidence of struggle, including torn clothing and traces of blood on nearby rocks. Dr. Voss could no longer maintain the pretense that these disappearances were accidents. During an emergency assembly, he acknowledged that something was deliberately targeting their community. His voice remained steady as he proposed new security protocols, but Alex could see the fear in the scientist's body language and the way his forearms kept shifting nervously. The settlement transformed overnight from a peaceful refugee camp into something resembling a fortress. Work details now traveled in groups of at least 4, with designated guards watching for threats. Evening activities moved indoors as soon as darkness fell. The communications array received constant staffing to prevent anyone from working alone. At the isolated station, Alex took unofficial charge of security planning, his military experience finally becoming obvious as he organized patrol schedules and defensive positions. He no longer bothered hiding his expertise, instead focusing on keeping everyone alive long enough to identify and eliminate whatever was hunting them. The refugees accepted Alex's leadership with obvious relief. Grateful to have someone who understood how to respond to violence, Dr. Voss formally requested that Alex coordinate their defense efforts, acknowledging that scientific training provided little preparation for dealing with predators. But Krell was far from finished with his hunt. The Ravok warrior had deliberately allowed the third attack to leave more evidence. escalating the refugees' fear while studying their response to direct threat. He was pleased to see that they had finally begun thinking in terms of defense rather than accident prevention, as it would make the final phase of his hunt more challenging and therefore more satisfying. The settlement's transformation into a defensive position interested Krell greatly. The unknown humanoid's emergence as a military leader confirmed his earlier assessment that this individual posed the greatest threat to his hunt. The defensive measures being implemented showed real tactical understanding, not the amateur efforts typically seen from civilian prey. From his concealment in the forest, Krell studied the new security arrangements with professional interest. The motion sensors were well positioned but detectable to someone with proper training. The patrol routes showed good coverage but followed predictable patterns. The defensive positions offered protection against ground assault but remained vulnerable to attack from above. Most intriguingly, the humanoid leader seemed to understand that they were facing a single, intelligent predator rather than random wildlife. The defensive measures focused on early warning and coordinated response rather than simple barriers, suggesting someone who had dealt with similar threats before. Krell's hunting instincts told him the time for subtlety was ending. The refugees had overcome their initial shock and begun organizing effective resistance. Soon they would become dangerous enough to threaten even a Ravak warrior, especially if their mysterious leader continued improving their tactical situation. Tomorrow night, Krell decided he would reveal himself and begin the final phase of his hunt. The terror of facing a Ravak warrior directly would shatter whatever confidence they had gained from their defensive preparations. Then he could complete his collection of skulls in the traditional manner, claiming trophies worthy of the greatest hunting ballads. The evening fire crackled in the center of the settlement as 20 survivors huddled close together, their faces illuminated by dancing flames. Dr. Voss had called this gathering to discuss their increasingly desperate situation. 3 members of their community had vanished without trace, and the defensive measures Alex had implemented seemed insufficient against whatever stalked them in the darkness. Nim sat beside the fire, her leaf-patterned skin showing the brown and gray tones of deep anxiety. The young town farmer had stopped venturing beyond the settlement's immediate perimeter, abandoning the outer crop fields rather than risk becoming the next victim. Her decision meant reduced food production, but survival had become more important than long-term sustainability. Alex stood slightly apart from the group, his eyes constantly scanning the forest beyond their circle of light. The makeshift spear in his hands had been fashioned from salvaged ship metal, its point honed to razor sharpness during long hours of preparation. He had tried to maintain optimism for the other's sake, but his military experience told him they were facing a predator, far more dangerous than ordinary wildlife. The discussion had grown heated as fear and frustration wore down their usual cooperation. Some refugees argued for abandoning the settlement entirely, fleeing into the wilderness in hopes of reaching another continent. Others insisted they should barricade themselves in the strongest shelter and wait for rescue. A few suggested attempting direct communication with whatever hunted them, hoping intelligence could be reasoned with. Dr. Voss listened to each proposal with scientific detachment, weighing pros and cons while struggling to maintain his role as leader. The Miran scientist had dealt with theoretical problems throughout his career, but this situation demanded practical solutions beyond his expertise. His forearms gestured nervously as he tried to formulate a plan that offered genuine hope for survival. The debate continued as darkness deepened around their small circle of safety. Motion sensors positioned around the perimeter remained silent, their electronic eyes watching for movement in the alien forest. Guard posts maintained constant vigilance, but the defenders knew their improvised weapons and amateur training provided little real protection against whatever had claimed their missing friends. Then the sensors began triggering in sequence, detecting something large moving through the forest with deliberate purpose. Alex immediately raised his spear and positioned himself between the approaching threat and the other refugees. His stance shifted into a combat-ready crouch as training took over from civilian instincts. The massive shape that emerged from the tree line defied every expectation the refugees had formed about their stalker. Krell stepped into the firelight like a nightmare given physical form, his 12-foot frame towering over the terrified survivors. Dark scales caught the flame's glow while bioluminescent ridges pulsed with predatory excitement. 4 arms ending, in claws longer than daggers flexed as he surveyed his prey. Dr. Voss stared at the apparition in scientific fascination despite his terror. The creature's anatomy suggested evolutionary adaptation for apex predation, with sensory organs clearly designed for tracking and killing sentient beings. Its bipedal stance and obvious intelligence marked it as something far more dangerous than any natural predator. Krell's voice rumbled from his elongated skull like distant thunder, speaking in the common galactic trade language that most refugees understood. The words emerged slowly, savored like fine wine as he introduced himself and his species to the cowering survivors. He explained Ravak hunting traditions with the pride of a craftsman describing his art. The refugees listened in growing horror. As Krell detailed his methodology, he had stalked them for days, studying their routines and identifying the strongest individuals. The disappearances had been carefully planned to maximize terror while minimizing risk to himself. Each victim had been selected for specific reasons, their deaths contributing to the psychological pressure that would make the final hunt more satisfying. Nim tried to retreat further into the group, her natural pacifist instincts overwhelmed by the presence of pure predatory malice. The other refugees clustered together like prey animals, their civilized veneer stripped away by confrontation with something that existed solely to kill them. Even the usually composed Dr. Voss showed visible signs of panic as he calculated their odds of survival. Krell continued his monologue, describing how Ravak warriors measured success not merely by the number of kills achieved, but by the quality of fear generated and the worthiness of resistance overcome. He had hunted across 12 star systems, claiming trophies from dozens of species, but mixed refugee settlements provided special satisfaction due to their variety and challenge. The predator began moving around the fire, forcing the refugees to turn constantly to keep him in sight. His movements were fluid and graceful despite his massive size, each step placed with precision that demonstrated perfect balance and muscular control. The display was deliberately intimidating, designed to reinforce his physical superiority. Over potential prey, Alex never took his eyes off the Ravak warrior, studying movement patterns and looking for weaknesses in what appeared to be perfect predatory design. His military training had included theoretical study of various hostile alien species, but he had never expected to face such a creature in actual combat. The spear in his hands felt pitifully inadequate against something built for killing. Dr. Voss attempted diplomacy, offering to surrender himself if Krell would spare the other refugees. The Miran scientist spoke in formal academic language, appealing to logic and mutual benefit while trying to negotiate terms that might save lives. His 4 arms spread in gestures of submission as he volunteered to sacrifice himself for the greater good. Krell paused in his circling to regard Dr. Voss with something resembling amusement. The Ravak warrior explained that mercy was weakness. In his culture, that only through combat could prey earn any form of respect. These refugees were clearly scholars and farmers, not warriors, which made them perfect for his collection but unworthy of honorable treatment. The predator's attention shifted to the other survivors, evaluating each individual as potential trophies. He commented on the town farmers' probable fear responses, the Miran technicians' likely attempts at technological solutions, and various other refugees' expected behaviors when faced with imminent death. His clinical assessment treated them as objects rather than living beings. Then Krell's gaze settled on Alex and something changed in the alien's demeanor. The human stood differently from the others, weight balanced on the balls of his feet and weapon held with obvious familiarity. His posture suggested training and experience rather than desperate improvisation. Most intriguingly, his eyes showed calculation rather than panic. Krell announced his intention to begin the final hunt by charging toward Nim, selecting the young Telm as his first victim in this culminating phase. The farmer's terrified cry echoed across the settlement as massive claws reached for her throat. Other refugees scattered in all directions, their fragile courage shattered by direct confrontation with unstoppable death. Alex moved without conscious thought, muscle memory and training overriding fear as he interposed himself between predator and prey. The improvised spear came up in a perfect defensive stance while his body shifted to absorb the impact of Krell's charge. For the first time in the encounter, the human's voice rang out with authority and confidence. Krell stopped mid-attack, confusion replacing bloodlust as he stared at this unexpected development. The human's stance was textbook perfect, his grip on the spear both relaxed and ready. Most disturbing was the complete absence of panic in the human's expression. Replaced by the cold focus of someone who had faced death before and survived, the Ravak warrior found himself frozen in place, unable to process what he was seeing. Everything he had been taught about humans suggested they were weak, dependent on technology, incapable of individual combat against superior species. Yet this human stood before him with the bearing of a trained warrior, ready to die protecting others. For the first time in his hunting career, Krell experienced genuine uncertainty. The human's behavior violated every assumption about prey species behavior, suggesting possibilities that threatened the foundation of Ravak's superiority. As predator and human stared at each other across the firelight, the nature of the hunt began to change in ways neither participant could have anticipated. The other refugees watched in stunned silence, as their quiet companion transformed into something they had never imagined, standing alone against impossible odds with nothing but courage and determination as weapons. Time seemed suspended as predator and human faced each other across the dying fire. Krell's forearms remained frozen mid-strike, his massive frame trembling with conflicting instincts that had never been challenged in decades of hunting. The human before him defied everything the Ravak warrior understood about prey species behavior, standing with quiet determination that spoke of training and experience far beyond civilian refugees. Alex shifted his grip on the improvised spear, the movement drawing Krell's attention to details he had missed before. The human stance distributed weight perfectly for either attack or defense. His breathing remained controlled despite facing certain death. Most unsettling was the complete absence of panic in eyes that showed only cold calculation and grim resolve. Dr. Voss watched from behind an overturned table, his scientific mind struggling to process this transformation of their quiet companion. The human who had spent months helping with construction and maintenance now stood like a trained soldier, his entire bearing changed by the presence of mortal danger. Whatever background Alex had concealed was finally revealing itself. Krell's hunting instinct screamed warnings as he studied the human's combat posture. This was not the stance of prey desperately improvising weapons for survival. The spear was held with familiar competence, positioned to threaten vital points despite the reach disadvantage. The human's body language suggested someone who had killed before and accepted the necessity of violence. The Ravak warrior stepped back involuntarily, his predatory confidence shaken by unprecedented uncertainty. In his culture, prey species were classified by their fear responses and survival strategies. Herbivores fled or surrendered. Scavengers hid until danger passed. Even aggressive species eventually broke under sustained psychological pressure. But this human showed none of those expected patterns. Alex began moving sideways, keeping himself between Krell and the other refugees while maintaining optimal fighting distance. His voice carried authority that had been absent during months of civilian interaction, issuing calm commands that sent the other survivors scattering toward predetermined safety positions. The tactical awareness displayed by these movements confirmed Krell's growing suspicions. The human was not merely brave or desperate, but professionally trained in combat operations. The defensive positions being utilized had been prepared in advance, suggesting military planning rather than panicked improvisation. This level of preparation indicated someone who had expected this confrontation. Krell found his voice, demanding to know what species could produce such warriors among supposed refugees. His cultural programming insisted that humans were weak, technologically dependent beings who collapsed when separated from their machines. The evidence before him contradicted generations of Ravak intelligence, suggesting fundamental misunderstandings about human capabilities. Alex responded by issuing a formal challenge according to Ravak warrior code, his knowledge of alien customs, revealing even deeper military training. He proposed single combat with stakes that honored predator traditions while protecting his fellow refugees. If Alex won, the survivors would be granted safe passage. If Krell won, he could claim his trophies with the honor due to worthy prey. The challenge created an impossible situation for the Ravak warrior. His culture demanded acceptance of formal combat requests from worthy opponents, but everything he had been taught insisted humans could not be worthy opponents. Refusing would violate sacred hunting traditions, yet accepting implied recognition of human warrior status that contradicted basic Ravak beliefs. Krell circled the human slowly, studying movement patterns and looking for weaknesses in what appeared to be textbook military bearing. The improvised spear was a crude weapon compared to Ravak natural armaments, but it was wielded with obvious skill. The human's positioning maximized his advantages, while minimizing opportunities for the predator's superior reach and strength. The combat that followed was brief but intense, lasting barely 3 minutes yet containing enough action to fill an epic ballad. Alex could not match Krell's raw physical power, but he fought with a combination of technique, intelligence, and desperate courage that gradually earned the alien's grudging respect. The human's initial attack was a feint that drew Krell into overextending, allowing Alex to score first blood with a precise thrust that penetrated between scales. The wound was minor but significant, proving that human weapons could harm even apex predators. When wielded with skill and determination, Krell responded with a devastating swipe that would have decapitated most opponents, but Alex rolled beneath the attack and came up inside the predator's guard. The spear point found another gap in the alien's natural armor, drawing a roar of pain and surprise from the Ravak warrior. The exchange continued with increasing ferocity as both combatants tested each other's limits. Krell's claws left deep gouges in the ground where Alex had been standing milliseconds before. The human spear created a growing pattern of minor wounds that individually meant nothing but collectively demonstrated his ability to find weaknesses in seemingly perfect defenses. Dr. Voss watched from concealment, his scientific mind cataloging details that would reshape his understanding of human capabilities. The species he had known as peaceful refugees was clearly capable of producing warriors who could stand against apex predators. Alex's movements showed training that required years to develop, suggesting military traditions far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Nim clutched her fellow refugees behind their makeshift barriers, unable to look away from the deadly dance playing out in their settlement. The quiet human who had helped with farming and construction was fighting with skills that belonged in legend rather than reality. Each successful dodge and counterattack defied her understanding of what was possible. The turning point came when Krell attempted a four-armed attack that should have been impossible to counter. Alex responded by using the predator's own momentum against him, stepping into the strike and driving his spear toward the alien's center of mass. The point penetrated deep enough to scrape bone before Krell could twist away. For the first time in his hunting career, Krell felt genuine fear. The human's technique was flawless, his courage absolute, and his determination unshakable. This was not the desperate flailing of prey fighting for survival, but the calculated violence of a trained warrior who had accepted death as the price of protecting others. The Ravak warrior stepped back, ichor seeping from multiple wounds that individually were minor but collectively represented something unprecedented. Never before had prey inflicted such damage on a Ravak hunter. The human stood ready for continued combat, breathing hard but still maintaining perfect fighting stance. Krell found himself caught between cultural imperatives that had never conflicted before. His warrior code demanded respect for worthy opponents, but his species' supremacist beliefs insisted that humans could not be worthy opponents. The evidence before him contradicted everything he had been taught about galactic hierarchy and predator dominance. The alien's bioluminescent ridges flickered uncertainly as he processed concepts that challenged his fundamental worldview. If Humans could produce such warriors. What did that mean for Ravak assumptions about their own superiority? If prey species were capable of effective resistance, how many other beliefs about galactic order were equally flawed? Alex maintained his defensive position, watching for signs that the combat would resume while hoping his demonstration had achieved its intended purpose. He had fought not just to protect his fellow refugees, but to prove that humans deserved respect rather than dismissal. The alien's confusion suggested that message was being received. Dr. Voss emerged from concealment as the immediate danger seemed to pass, approaching carefully while keeping Alex between himself and the wounded predator. The Miran scientist's voice carried wonder as he addressed the human warrior, finally understanding why their quiet companion had always seemed different from typical refugees. Krell struggled with a decision that would define not only this hunt, but his entire understanding of galactic reality. Ravak tradition provided no precedent for the situation he faced. The human had fought with honor and skill, earning respect through combat excellence. Yet, acknowledging human warrior status would undermine the supremacist beliefs that justified Ravak hunting culture. The silence stretched as predator and human regarded each other across the firelit clearing. Around them, the settlement waited to learn whether this confrontation would end in continued violence or unprecedented recognition of human capabilities. Finally, Krell spoke in the formal cadences reserved for addressing equals rather than prey. He declared Alex to be worthy prey that had earned the right to live through combat excellence. In Ravak culture, such declarations were sacred and binding, representing the highest honor a hunter could bestow upon a potential victim. The alien warrior sheathed his claws and stepped back, acknowledging that the hunt was over. He warned Alex that others of his kind would eventually come, drawn by stories of human warriors and seeking to test their own skills against this new challenge. But for now, the refugees had earned safe passage and the right to continue their survival efforts. As Krell disappeared back into the forest, Alex finally allowed himself to relax his combat stance. The other refugees gathered around him with questions and gratitude. Their quiet companion revealed as the warrior who had saved them all. Dr. Voss coordinated evacuation preparations while Nim expressed amazement at capabilities she had never suspected. The story ended with Alex looking up at the alien stars, knowing that this encounter had forever changed humanity's reputation in the galaxy. Whether that change would prove beneficial or catastrophic remained to be seen, but humans could no longer be dismissed as weak prey species incapable of defending themselves. The legend of the human warrior who had faced down a Ravak hunter would spread through both civilized worlds and predator cultures, reshaping assumptions about galactic hierarchy and the true nature of strength. Sometimes the greatest victories were won not through superior firepower, but through the courage to stand against impossible odds for the sake of others.